Welcome back to video number 2 in our series where we are talking about Azure functions, but more specifically in this series, we're going to be switching gears, and instead of talking about HTTP trigger based functions, we're going to now talk about timer triggered functions. So very different, but they kind of function the same, just a tiny bit, but there's some differences. So in our previous video, we got our project set up. We gave an overview about kind of what the objective is, what we're trying to do. And then once we got that overview, we then set up our project, we install our dependencies. And in this video, we're going to start writing the code that's going to be used in our function. So I'm going to go to my Sigma RSS Feed folder. This contains a lot of the files that we just kind of need. Now in this situation, they have some sample folders that were, sample files that were generated. We don't need all of them. So like the sample one, we don't need that one. The README, we don't technically need it, but they kind of give you at least a helpful link if you want to learn more about the cron expressions. So, we talked about this in the previous one. This helps us define how frequently we want this function to run. So if you want just some extra resources, then I would recommend that you go here and just learn a little bit more. We have the function.json file. This is actually really important because it points to the file that we're going to be executing when we run our function. So note that this is init.py. Guess what? That's init.py. It's very important. It points to this file. Additionally, you'll see some information in here. So one is the binding. So in this case, we have a timer trigger. Direction is in the schedule. So this is how frequently it's going to be running. Remember that we denoted that we want to have it run every 20 seconds. So every 20 seconds, that's minutes, that's hours, days of weeks, and then I think months or something like that. I have to double check what it has, but they provide some documentation on it. So in this situation, we want it to run every 20 seconds. You can change this down the road. So you can go in here and say, hey, instead of every 20 seconds, I want it to be every 30 seconds. You can do that as well. So this one's actually a little bit more flexible. You can change it real time if you want. Now we have the init.py file. This is also a very important file. There is one very important piece of information. You have to have a main function inside of here. So you need to have a function called main. Basically, just take the template they give you and keep it. You can add stuff in here, but don't delete it. You can delete the stuff that's in it, and then you can change it, but you need to have a function called main. If you don't, the functions don't work because you're not pointing to that main function. So this is something that's very important. You cannot change the name of that function. You can have other functions in this file. So you can have like helper functions, and you can call those helper functions from within here. But again, they all have to be encapsulated inside of this main function. So just be aware of that. Alrighty, let's start importing some libraries. We're going to import our JSON because we work a lot with JSON when it comes to either displaying the content or in some cases loading it. We're going to also import request. And then from here, we have date time, we have logging. We're going to be parsing some XML content. So we're going to do xml.etree.elementtree as ET. So this will be used to parse the RSS feed as it comes in. We're going to also use some type hinting. So we're going to say from typing import list, from typing import dictionary as well. Goodness, why does it keep generating that? And then additionally, we are going to be using some Azure services. So I'm going to move this one up here, right there. And then the Azure services. So we're going to be using Azure Storage Blob. And then from that blob service, we're going to import a container client. So this will represent a container inside of our Azure storage account. We're going to also be using our key vault to grab some credentials. So we're going to do Azure Key Vault secrets and then import a secret client. We're going to also have from the Azure Identity service, we're going to have the default Azure credentials. So this one basically will authenticate our service as we're using it. So in order to access services that fall under my account, they have to authenticate me. So the default Azure credential object basically runs through a bunch of different authentication processes, and whatever one returns a valid response, it uses that to authenticate you. I will show you how to register your function so that way you can leverage this, because if you don't register it, you can't use it. So I'll probably try to run it without registering it first, so that way you can see what it looks like when it's not working correctly. We'll register it, and then from there, I'll show you what it looks like in the correct manner. Now, if you've noticed, my IntelliSense has not been very friendly to me today. Something happened. I don't know. I think it has something to do with VS Code, but ever since I updated to 3.9, it's been just nonstop. So from here, this is pretty much all we need to import. We're now going to define a function that's called parse RSS feed. This will take some content, which we are expecting to be a string. It will parse it, and then it's going to return a list of dictionaries. So what is this doing? Well, remember that we were trying to parse. Oh, not that one. Goodness. Remember that we're trying to parse some content on an RSS feed. So basically what we want to do is we want to take this giant content. We want to find each of the item tags like this. So everything that contains an item. And then what we want to do is parse each element inside of this item tag. So that's basically what we're going to be doing. So this function is going to help us parse that content. Now, I'm not going to write a doc string. I will write a doc string for the GitHub version one, but just to make things a little bit quicker, we'll just avoid that. First thing is we're going to initialize a list to store our articles. So we will call this articles. It's an empty list. Then from here, parse the content passed through. So we will call this root. It will equal element tree from string, because we're basically passing through a string, that content. And then from here, once we parse it, we need to look for all the items. So all the item tags. Grab all the articles by finding the item tag. So this is going to be called articles collection. This will equal root find all, and then we need to point to each of them. So we're going to start at the base. We're going to find a channel tag, because if you look at it, channel's at the top. So start at your root, which is here. Find the channel one, because inside of channel is each of the item tags. So find the channel, then find each item tag. So that's your articles. We're then going to loop through each article. So for article in articles collection. And then we're going to basically prep a dictionary to store values as we parse them. So we'll call this article dictionary. And then this will be an empty dictionary. And then from here, loop through each element in each article. So we're going to say for elements in article. Misspelled it. Typical. That's pretty typical of Alex. And then we're going to use the iter method to iterate through each element. So there's different iteration methods. There's iter find. There's iter text, iter in general. So we just do iter in general because that's just going to loop through each element. Obviously, depending on the XML content you're working with, that might not work for you. But in this situation, I kind of tested it and it validated that it was working. So from here, set the tag from the element as the key and the text as the value. Okay, so we are going to say article dictionary. The key is going to be the element, but it's going to be the tag. And then we're going to take the element text, we'll strip it because sometimes there's like a lot of line breaks and stuff like that. And that will be the value. And we're going to basically do that for each element. Once we're done with that particular article, we're going to add the dictionary to the master list. So we're going to say add to the master list. From here, I'm going to do articles, append, and then it's going to be article dictionary. So we're going to add that new one in here. And then once we've done this for each article, guess what? We can return the articles from the function, and then we'll be good. So that's going to parse each of the articles for us. But now we need to handle the function, which is actually going to go out and grab the information like that. There's different ways to do this. So what is it? In previous videos, I showed you how to grab URL parameters. I'm not going to do this in this one. Actually, in this one, I'm just going to have a static list, but you could technically leverage the same logic that I did in the previous video, which is, grab some parameters or something like that. And you could do something along that nature that would work totally fine. There's different ways of doing it, but in this one, I just kind of want to demonstrate it running on a timer. So we're just going to use a static list. And then from here, I already have that static list ready to go. See, you get nice little doc strings. Woo. So we're going to define a list called URLs to poll. You could even have a JSON file in here if you wanted to read it. There's different ways of doing this. You could query a database like we did in the previous one. So lots of different ways to do it. There's not really a set way. That's the nice thing about functions, is they're designed to be flexible. Okay, then from here, once we've defined that list, we do need to initialize our credentials. Now, like I said before, we're going to be using our default credentials. Now, I've already talked about this in a previous video, and this was way back when I first started the Azure services. This assumes that you have it set up correctly. So if you don't have it set up correctly, I am going to redirect you to that video. Otherwise, you can do the old method of you load a config file and do it like that. I wouldn't recommend that, because once you put it into your services, that's not usually the best way of doing it. You really should just use your default Azure credentials. But again, that does assume that this is set up correctly. So you're going to initialize your credentials, and then you're going to connect to your key vault and authenticate yourself. So we're going to create a new variable, secret client. Actually, we'll call it something a little bit. We'll call it Sigma Key Vault. So I'm going to say secret client vault URL. Let's just put a blank string for right now, because I'm not going to type it out. I'm just going to copy and paste it. The credentials is going to be your default credentials. Let's grab the vault URL. It's nothing super fancy. I just don't want to type it. Bam. So there is our secret client that's going to connect to our key vault. Then from here, we need to grab our connection string from the key vault. So this has already been stored inside of it. I'm just grabbing that secret. This is normally my process for grabbing information that's either sensitive or is going to be used across different services. I put it in a key vault, I know it's secure, and then I can reference that key vault in any of my scripts and then simply just put it in. So from here, grab the blob connection string. And then from here, we'll create a new variable, call it blob connection string. And then it will be the Sigma key vault, get secret. And then I need to pass through the name of that secret. So I'm going to call it Blob Storage connection string. So just the connection string to my Blob Storage account. From here, I'm going to connect to the container client. So the container the container exist inside of my storage account. So I'm going to connect to my Sigma function news storage account. And then I want to connect to this container, Microsoft Azure articles. So I'm going to create a new variable, call it container client. It's going to equal a new instance of a container client object. And I'm going to say, create that client from a connection string. That connection string, well, we already have it because if you remember, we grabbed it right up above. It's the blob's connection string. And then I want to make sure I pass through the value, not the object. And then I need to make sure I provide the container name. So which container? Well, in this situation, it's going to be called Microsoft Azure Articles. Again, it should match exactly what I see here. Exactly what I see here. Now I have a container. So we'll leverage that container in a little bit, but for right now, I want to loop through each URL, pull the content, clean it up. Once it's all done, we'll get to the part where we write it to a file. So I'm going to create a new variable that will store all the articles as I grab them. So create list to store all the articles. We will call this articles. It's going to equal a blank list. Loop through each URL. For URL in URLs to pull, we're going to make the request and then grab the response. So we're going to call this response. It's going to equal request.get. The URL is the URL. And that's it for that. If it was okay, we're going to say response.okay. So if response was okay, then what? Parse the articles. So we'll call this articles parsed. That will equal our parse RSS feed. It expects one argument called content, and that's going to equal our response.content. I'll put this on a new line so it's a little easier to read. Then from here, some feeds are empty, so we need to be ready for that. So if the feed is not empty, so if articles parse, so basically if we don't have an empty list, then simply combine it with the old one. Articles parsed. And there you go. That's basically parsing it, combining it. At this point, we're going to have a master list of just a bunch of dictionaries. So we want to save all of that content to a file in our Blob storage account. So here I need to create a dynamic file name. Why? Well, if it's running as frequently as we're doing right now, either I need to overwrite the old one, or if I need to keep records of every time I pull it, I have to change the file name each time. In this situation, I'm going to create a dynamic file name that just simply leverages the timestamps. So I'm going to say, put it in a folder called Microsoft RSS Feed, and then call it articles. And then I'm going to put a placeholder. So I'm going to say something's going to be put here every time. And then you also want to make sure you have the extension, because if you don't have the extension, guess what? When you download it and stuff like that, you can get all sorts of weird stuff. So make sure you have the file extension in there if appropriate. So I'm going to format it. I'm going to say timestamps equals date time now. And then I want it as a timestamp like that. And then from here, that's our new file name. So now we can actually, I'm gonna get rid of all this. So now I can actually write it to the container. So create a new blob in the container. So I'm gonna say container client, upload blob, the name equals the file name, the data equals JSON. We're going to dump it to a string. I'm going to pass through my articles. And then I'm going to say, hey, indent it 4 times. And then finally, I need to specify the blob type. In this situation, I just want to do a block blob. There's page blob and stuff like that. In this situation, we're just going to be using a block blob. That's just the one that's working for us right now. And with that, that's actually the entire function. So not a ton of code, but it's actually pretty powerful once you kind of see it in action. Yeah, I went over, but that's okay. So in our next video, we're going to show you how to locally debug your code, if that's the best way to put it. And then we're going to show you how to publish it to Microsoft Azure. We'll talk about registering it and the errors that are going to happen if you don't register it. And then we'll show you how to load it into Power Query. So if you have any questions at this point, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next video.